look, the Tory MP Mel Stride, he has been saying, well, he's been saying quite a lot, quite frankly, but anyway, he's been saying that white working-class boys apparently feel distance from society, and he feels that is one of the things that has led to the riots that we've seen on the streets. Aaron, is that fair?
I think the formulation's all wrong. There's a few things to say. Firstly, often you'll see people saying, actually, young men of various minority communities, Afro-Caribbean or South Asian or East Asian or whatever, they're more likely to go to university than white British boys, therefore they're doing better than them. Firstly, that doesn't mean anything. Just because you're getting yourself into 40 grand worth of debt doesn't necessarily mean you're achieving much. And very often, working class boys of these kinds of backgrounds, we've got a few places where they're talking about with regards to deprivation, places like Middlesbrough, Blackpool, Liverpool, Hartlepool, Hull. Young boys from these places are more likely to go into, for instance, trades, vocational trades, than people who go to university. And you know what? It's a really smart choice. They make a lot more money doing it, and they don't get in debt doing it. So I don't buy that. Then secondly, white working class boys. I mean, look, my view is this. So many people in our society, particularly younger people, don't feel like they have a stake in the country. And that's a huge problem. That is a huge problem. And, of course, people are going to have a range of proposals on how to remedy that. But this idea of white working-class boys, and it's coming from a Conservative MP, and they were in charge for 14 years, it actually gets my back up, because they were part of an administration which provided so little hope for, I don't say young people, really anybody under 35, I think, in the last 15 years, thinks the country's gone backwards. I know there's many people older than 35 too, but I'm just talking about the group he's talking about. And they don't feel like they have a stake in the country or its future. So it's irritating he's talking like this the minute they're no longer in charge.
Do you agree with that, Peter?
Well, partly, but my main problem with all this is, first of all, I don't think there have been any riots. What there have been is outbreaks of disorder. To call them riots is to make them sound far more important and significant than they are. They don't have any political aspect. People who have a political axe to grind like to claim that they're riots, so they can say, well, if you'd listened to me and done what I said you should do, there wouldn't have been these riots. So the riots were caused by you not doing what I said you should do. I think this is a feeble form of politics. People should be very careful before trying to attribute any political significance to events of this kind. It's just violent disorder, and that's all it's been. And it worked in the opposite direction in the supposed Brixton riots of 1981, when there was violent disorder which the left played upon to try, very successfully as it happened, to basically disembowel the police and say that they should have an awful lot of their powers and strength taken away from them on the pretext that the Brixton disorders had been caused by a particular kind of policing which they didn't like. And people will do this all the time. I remember going over to France during some alleged riots. There was just a bunch of kids setting fire to cars in various suburbs of Paris. There was nothing political about it. People should not use it now. Beyond that, on the question of white working class boys, there's no question at all that this is a section of the population which has been cheated by the school system for a very long time. Because since 1965, the rule has been that if your parents have no money either to pay school fees or to buy a house in the catchment area of a better school, you will get a bad education. So there's some truth in that. But it's certainly, I agree, that for the Conservative Party to get worked up about that, something which it's had multiple opportunities to correct ever since it first came back into office in 1970, after the abolition of the grammar schools began, and has done absolutely nothing at all. They really haven't got any business complaining about it now.
I mean, you say about terminology that we maybe shouldn't call them riots, but there's other people on the other side of the fence, perhaps, that they've been pushing to get some of this activity that we're seeing on the streets defined as terrorism.
Well, that's, I think, equally wrong. It isn't. There's a lot of things are politicised, which are not. A lot of events, which later turn out to actually be mental health events committed by people who've had their minds overthrown by drug abuse, are described at the time, and often for many years afterwards, by media and politicians as terrorist actions, when they're not. We should be very careful about attributing a terrorist motive to events until we can actually show that this is so. No, I don't think that makes sense either.
What do you think to this whole... But have you seen this? I mean, I've seen quite a lot of people, particularly online, suggesting or expressing disappointment that no one, as of yet, has been convicted under a terrorism charge.
Well, counter-terror legislation is used very widely, and it has been really since the Blair years. So, for instance, many people are detained or arrested under counter-terror legislation all the time, actually, with regards to protests, with regards to disorder. That happens all the time. In terms of the terrorism label, I'm reticent to use it, but then there are certain things which I think absolutely fall under that category. So, for instance, there were Telegram groups talking about how the Home Secretary needed to be murdered. There were messages where people specified particular individuals who should be isolated and, again, murdered. Those who committed that murder would be heroes of the quote-unquote movement. So I think that quite clearly, to me, falls under the rhetoric and motivations of what we would traditionally view as terrorism. If you're saying that you should murder the Home Secretary in a politically targeted assassination, I mean, that to me is the dictionary definition of terrorism.
See, many people, and I do always have to add this caveat because I know people clip everything up, so just to be absolutely clear, I don't think there's any justification or excuse or anything for people setting fire to hotels with people in it, attacking places of worship, police, people, and all the rest of it. I think that is categorically, unequivocally wrong, OK? But I have a question. If you're a member of society who has the view that actually you want controlled immigration into this country, and now, in the here and now as well, you definitely want these boats to stop. So you will have voted for this in multiple general elections. You would have voted for those kind of policies in the Brexit referendum and so on and so forth. And actually what's been delivered to you is the exact opposite from what you're democratically requesting of your leaders. Maybe at the last election, some people will have decided, you know what, I'm not going to politically engage. Some people will have chosen to go for reform because of their policies. Those people then being smeared as far-right, neo-Nazis, fascists, and so on and so forth. How do people get that message across and get it listened to and get it respected and, crucially, get it acted on that controlled immigration is the policy that they require in this country, and the stopping of the boats, likewise? How do you do it?
So, the Tories just got 24% of general election, precisely for the reason you've just said, really. They were punished for failing to live up to the pronouncements that they'd made all the way back to David Cameron in 2010, reducing immigration to tens of thousands. We get net immigration under Priti Patel of 1.3 million over 2 years. Extraordinary, really. Let me couch this in what it would look like if the shoe was on the other foot. If you had a left-wing electorate and you repeatedly had a Labour government voted into office and they were promising public ownership, they were saying we're going to bring rail, mail, water, energy into public ownership, and what they did instead for 14 years was just to privatise stuff, that would be really bad. That would be an insult to democracy. That would undermine the legitimacy of our system. But I don't think any of your viewers or listeners would say that therefore means that all those left-wing people who kept on voting for a Labour Party to bring things into public ownership, that didn't happen. Therefore, and I know you're not saying this, but I'm just trying to clarify how silly that rationale is, therefore they can go and, I don't know, set fire to the houses of CEOs. That's the equivalent situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point, because I categorically said at the outset none of those criminal activities are justified or excused.
Well,
I've said all that, I made that clear. So what I'm saying is, so we all agree you can't go around setting fire to things. Yeah, we agree it's wrong, you shouldn't do it and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I'm asking you then, so you can't do those things, that is wrong, everyone agrees that's wrong. You can't get the policy changed democratically, because we all agree.
Well, hang on a minute. You're saying that.
Let me quickly answer this, Peter, because I know Peter's itching to come back to this. First of all, you can legally protest. I might not agree with Tommy Robinson, but if they want to lawfully assemble and make a point politically, I believe in free speech.
They've been doing that, Aaron.
No, that happened, and we talked about that last week, right? They went on a protest. I don't think that should be prohibited. I'm just saying that should be obviously open to people. And then ultimately, change is going to come about through the political system. And it's going to take a long time.
It's going the opposite direction.
Wait
If
a
you
minute.
are...
Michelle, political action is hard. You can't just say, I want this, and vote for somebody who comes along and says, without any evidence he knows what he's doing, that he will do it for you. I want this, and then expect to get it at the next election. Until the late 1970s in this country, there were political parties which had very, very large memberships. And those memberships had the ability to actually influence the direction of the parties which they supported. The political parties now have been completely hollowed out. They don't have this at all. And part of that is because people are not politically engaged anymore. You can't just jump from saying, well, I voted for policy X. I went down to the polling station and I made my mark on the piece of paper and put it in the slot, and it didn't happen, and therefore I've exhausted all the possibilities of democracy. You have to recognise, if you want something to happen in a democracy, you have to keep on working for it. You have to become politically engaged in a civilised and active fashion. Yeah. People don't do that. And because of this huge gap that's opened up between people and government, which the political parties, I have to say, done very little to close, and because the political parties we have don't, in fact, represent the divisions in the country, it doesn't happen. And one of the reasons why I've been calling for so long for a change in the political parties in this country is in an attempt to achieve that. But that is what you have to understand, that politics is a long, slow business. You don't get what you want the day after you ask for it.
I know, but I think this is all hypothetically really interesting stuff, but many people at home will sit there and say, do you know what, I am in a community where they are about to commandeer my local hotel and shove 100 people in there that have been crossing the channel. They will say, we've voted 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, Brexit referendum.
And what else did they do apart from vote?
Well, they will
it's
say
not
that
enough.
they've taken to the
it's not enough just voting.
In many cases,
simply
to stop this.
Enough. If you care seriously about it, you have to do more than vote every 5 years.
Can I say, Michelle, something?
Well, I might come back to this actually. What I'm saying to you is, if you're someone who's directly impacted by these policies in your community, you hear the stories like that lady that very sadly drowned crossing or was killed crossing the channel very recently. You hear the stories about people there getting knives out and stopping anyone from trying to assist that person from getting help because they wanted to be here. You hear that story about that little girl, I think she was about 7, getting trampled on by men that had no regard in that boat. And then you sit there and you go, these people are coming to a hotel near me and it's happening imminently. And all of your suggestions and ideas, they're really fascinating, and I know that they're rooted in goodwill, but I just don't think it's practical for people whose lives have been affected. Then
finish your argument. What do you think they should do?
Well, I might come back to that after the break. Yeah, why not? Let's revise it. Let's revisit this after the break. Trying to get to the bottom of an issue. I do like to go off on random tangents on my programme, as regular viewers will have noticed. And I'm asking the question, if you're somebody who lives in an area where, for example, a hotel is now being passed over for use for the asylum system, and you're opposed to that, because if you're in favour of that, great, high five. But if you're opposed to that for a variety of different reasons, how do you make your voice heard? And we've gone through this democratically. People have voted repeatedly for controlled immigration and got exactly the opposite. Brexit referendum, control your immigration, exactly the opposite. We all collectively agree we know what you can't do. You can't go around setting fire to hotels and being violent and all the rest of it. We all collectively agree that is wrong. And I'm asking the question, so if you're in that camp, what do you do? And you've asked me, Michelle, what's your answer? And I don't have one. I'm genuinely at a loss.
You don't have it. I go back to my original answer. You have to work for the political objective that you want.
But that's a long-term answer.
It absolutely. It is a long-term answer. It's the only way to do it. And I took on myself to call for a basic reform many, many years ago. And the response I got from the people who are now saying all things such as you say, or who are calling these events riots and taking all kinds of other views, which I strongly disagree with. The response I got when I said, look, we really needed to get rid of the Conservative Party in the year 2010, which was the point when it could have been done, was I received nothing but abuse and worse than abuse I lost friends. People stopped talking to me. Everything I said was denounced. I couldn't even get a hearing in most cases. And now an awful lot of people say you were right, or other people say, well, why don't you carry on saying it at the last election? Well, it's too late by then. But the fact was there was a time between 2003 and 2010 when people in this country who wanted this sort of thing to be reformed had an opportunity to reform the political system of this country. All kinds of idiots say, well, what we want is proportional representation, which would achieve worse than nothing for Conservative forces in this country, or other kinds of nonsense. What we needed was a major new political party to replace the Conservative Party, and we also needed not to ratify, as the principal second party of the country, a party which is more or less identical to New Labour. But in the 2010 election, people did ratify David Cameron's party. And this led to the catastrophe, in my view, and I still view it as one of the EU referendum, in which we created a permanent constitutional crisis and had a ridiculous position where we had a parliament which didn't believe in the main policy it had to implement. So no surprise then that when they came to implement it, they messed it up, as they have done. So people would not look in the face the thing they needed to do, which was the necessity of individual political action where you live, creating a political movement which represents, in a civilized fashion, the things you think. It's no good saying, well, I've shouted, I voted 4 times in 20 years and nothing's happened. Of course nothing's happened. Why would it happen? The forces which prevented it from happening, which you could have done something to dismantle, are still sitting there because you wouldn't do anything to change them. A political action that, when New Labour came to power in 1997 and revolutionised the country, those people have been working for 15 hard years. I loathe everything they did, but my goodness, they'd done the preparation for what they were going to do. They had a detailed political programme and a working political movement to implement it, and they achieved it. Now, on the so-called right in this country, there's been nothing of the kind. And to complain now, oh, well, no one's done anything they asked for. How hard did you ask?
Well, I mean, I'm going to bring you in after the break, Aaron, and you can respond to some of this. Glenda, you're one of my viewers. You've said, well, what about a general strike? Is that a way of getting our voice heard on this issue? Well, he's saying by whom? Aaron, I think, was that a snigger at that?
No, look, I'm on the left. I like strikes.
Well, there you go. That's Glenda. I'm asking, because one of my concerns about all of this, if you're someone that celebrates all of these Burke crossings and all the rest of it, then that's really great for you. There are different voices in this conversation, and I worry that people on the other side of the argument, who, let's face it, are more often than not the people that actually live in the communities that are having this done to them, their voices are getting more and more and more silenced as the days go on. And I'm asking a question. If you're in this situation where your community is being changed in this way and it's not what you want, how do you make your voice heard in a peaceful, law-abiding way? Have you got an answer to that?